Thank you for joining us. Yeah, it's early.
Yes, I know, first time.
So not that Jay needs an intro, but I'm going to lay it down so you don't have to brag about yourself.
Okay.
Thank you. So Jay is one of the best guards ever to play college basketball.
I will take that.
Yep. Two-time NCAA Men's Player of the Year. Mm-hmm. That's right?
Yeah, that is correct.
A key part of the 2001 National Championship team at Duke.
Yes, I do.
Okay. So after leaving the NBA, a few years later, you've completely reinvented yourself. You effectively wrote the book on reinventing yourself, literally. And you can find Jay on game day either draining a half-court shot or ripping your shirt off or just doing something crazy.
Yes, fan interaction, engagement.
You're also involved in a ton of different projects, right? I feel like
my wife will get mad at you for saying that. Less is more for her.
Yeah, less is definitely more. But I know you're also a big family man, so that's brownie points.
Yes.
Okay. And so we're going to talk about a lot of the stuff that you're involved with, from like the boardroom to uninterrupted and more, right?
Yep.
So let's dive in. So as I mentioned, you wrote a book on reinvention. As you left the world of being a professional athlete and stepped into kind of your current role now, what was that like? Like what was the toughest thing that you had to deal with kind of mentally?
I see companies go through this all the time, MK. So everybody, I got lucky enough to be the second pick in the 2002 NBA draft. Wow, that dates myself. There was a 7'6" Chinese guy that year in the draft named Yao Ming, which is the reason why I was number 2, because there's a lot of 7'6" Chinese guys out there. And played a year for Chicago Bulls. And then, like anybody, when you're a little bit younger and a little bit more rebellious, had a motorcycle, which was in my contract that I wasn't allowed to have a motorcycle. My contract would be null and void if I got hurt on a motorcycle, a jet ski, a car going above 85 miles per hour, skydiving, etc. But at that given time in my life, everybody was doing those type of things. Even my head coach was riding and going on long trips. So I hit a utility pole randomly going to my agent's house about 65, 70 miles an hour. Decided to stay in the hospital for 2.5 months. Took a year to learn how to walk, a year to learn how to run again, and tried to come back, but inevitably my body couldn't sustain that type of load. Load management, as LeBron would say.
Sure.
Couldn't do it. And so for me, getting into broadcasting, I think the reinvention part was honestly what you see companies go through. You think, your brand is one thing, and you're driving a narrative within that brand. And then for me, trying to understand, okay, I am no longer a basketball player, but that's the world that we live in, MK. The first thing that people ask you, especially in New York City or any big metropolitan city, is, hey, what do you do?
Right.
And you associate yourself with what you do. So I think for me, it was about how do I extract myself out of what I do, and who is Jay Williams without basketball?
Yeah.
And then learning, okay, how do I want to tell this narrative? Do I want to be honest with my fans or with people who are just going through everyday stuff? So I think the more transparent I could be, and that was a process of 2.5, 3 years writing 250 pages.
Yep.
But it was cathartic because I was writing about me and my experiences and all the things that have helped me grow from that. And I think my narrative, instead of being why me, became why not me.
Right.
All the adversity that I had faced up until that point, I started to use as empowerment. And I think the more I started to speak about that openly, I think the more I engaged with people and the more that I became relatable, because people see that you're on the screen, that you do something that's incredible, playing professional sports or whatever it may be, you're kind of out of touch. Right. Your reality is warped. And I think by just kind of showcasing all the things I've been through in my life, it didn't make me any different than anybody else. Right.
But in looking back, like, it probably sounds a lot easier than it was at the time. Like, what was the thing that really got you through it?
I think it was the people I surrounded myself with. I was very lucky to have a guy like Coach K, who was on my board, another guy named Charles Grantham, who was ran the Players Union for over 15 years at the NBA.
Yeah.
I had my parents. And I think it was people that challenged me to be honest with myself.
Right.
I've always gravitated towards people that have constantly pushed me to be more truthful with myself. Because at the end of the day, you could project whatever you want about yourself out there. I mean, we live in that age, social media-wise, and I deal with a lot of kids, where they're always projecting their best image. If it's them taking a picture by a Ferrari randomly on the street,
Sure.
and like, well, that's not your Ferrari. They're like, that's what's going to be one day. I'm like, so why are you trying to project that? And I think we all get kind of wrapped into that. So for me, I think being surrounded by people that challenge me to think about myself and reflect on what I did correct, what I did incorrectly, how I can better myself. And it was very much similar to sports. It's like after a game, after you go through a deal, you sit down with your team and you reassess what the deal points were, what could we have done better, what could we have done differently, and I think it was the first time I actually did that for myself in my own life.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like you've definitely come out on the other side much stronger for it, and I fundamentally believe that everything kind of has a way of working out, and sometimes the path is just winding, right? So I guess go back to the motorcycle incident. Like, how does that affect the decisions you make now in your personal and professional lives?
It's exactly what you have mentioned. It's been a journey. I think for me, at 21 years old, my dream had been to be a professional athlete, but just not to be an athlete. More importantly, my dad worked at Amex for over 15 years. My mother was a guidance counselor. I watched her go back to school, earn multiple degrees to finally become a principal after 24 years to earn 6 figures. And I wanted to leverage the platform I had to own my own business.
Yeah.
So even doing little things like sending letters to all the top CEOs when I got drafted to Chicago. I was extremely competitive, taking Michael Jordan's locker because it had been empty for 7 years. I'm like, well, obviously we've been losing. It's been empty. Somebody should take it. All that stuff was my competitive nature that defined me. And I think once you lose that identity, lose the fact that also the recognition of that identity, people saying, oh, I'm a huge fan of what you've been able to do or what you've been able to accomplish on the court, that was a struggle for me. So I think reestablishing myself within the broadcasting world and the business world, I was very, very, very driven because you wanted to make up for lost grounds.
Yeah.
And I think there are byproducts of that as far as your own personal growth, because sometimes you could be so immersed and so myopic in accomplishing all these things that you need to actually, in retribution to make up for what you lost, you don't really focus on what you have. You're too busy climbing.
Yep.
And I think so initially the first 5-6 years started off in that capacity, working for an agency, working for 24-hour fitness, consulting for multiple brands, becoming like a regular person. Like I had an 8-to-5 job. I never had that before in college. To then transitioning to, okay, I feel somewhat stable in my career, but I want to do more. Then writing a book, being open about my book, then translating that into how do I start, building out content? How do I start subsidizing content with different brands? To then getting married, to then learning more about yourself as a person, to being challenged with a partner that challenges me each and every day. So I think if you're lucky enough to be here, MK, that journey never stops, nor should it stop, because you should always think about how can I have self-improvement.
Yep, agreed. So let's talk NBA for a second.
Sure.
So the commissioner recently made a comment about like his awareness around the fact that like NBA players are generally not happy. Did you see this?
Yes.
Okay. And he views it as a big issue for the league. So, like, do you think that's just like a generational thing? And what is it about today's generation that kind of breeds that type of discontent?
I think within the NBA specifically, it's challenging. Those are the most recognizable athletes in North America. So.
And is it social media? Does social media
It is, and I was going to get into that. I think it's the fact that there's no privacy anymore. And I think that athletes are trying to live their lives as open as possible because that's what the media has always wanted. I think when you do that, though, you leave your life up to speculation. That particular comment that Adam Silver made, he was on the podcast, he was sitting with Bill Simmons at the Sloan Conference, was about dealing with either comments by Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving about, at the end of the day, you want to build a business. You want mParticle to be the best business it can be. You understand that it will be scrutinized the more successful your business becomes or the more profiles that are done on you. the more you are being consumed by the general public. I look at all these athletes as their own individual business, but it also transfers into the personal life as well. And now we live in that age where your personal life is also your business as well. It can affect your business. I mean, prime example, Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods 13 years ago was rejected by the world for having an affair on his wife. I'm not condoning that. That was wrong, especially at the degree he had. But now think about how the conversation has changed 12, 13 years later.
Yeah, everybody loves a comeback.
Everybody loves a comeback. He's won the Masters. He's back bigger than ever. But also now it's, so okay, well, I don't condone that, but how does that compare to domestic violence that we see certain athletes have these days? So I think things have changed over time, and it's about the perception of who these guys are. And I do think a lot of athletes aren't happy. I don't think they have a chance to live a normal life. Now, I understand that they are also very blessed to make a lot of money. And I know for a lot of people that is the end game, but you never get a chance to even reflect on who you are, or how do you make mistakes when you're in the public eye, naturally being scrutinized or criticized for everything that you do, every way that you try to lead. It's essentially somebody coming in, a camera coming into your business and breaking down every degree of how you try to lead. And people say they know how to do it better, but realistically, you're the only one on the journey.
Yeah, it's tough. You can't really have an off day.
You never have an off day. That's no more the world you live in.
Yeah. So I also see part of it is like a mental health thing too, right? It's kind of cracking under stress. I know in the technology world and in the startup world, there's been a lot more attention to that kind of stuff recently. Mm-hmm. Is that actively talked about in the world of professional sports, or is it still like somewhat taboo?
No, I think in sports it's being spoken about now more than ever. I've been seeing that translate to the business side as well. Even Eddie Q is a good friend over at Apple. They talk about these mental health booths that they have, where you literally can spend time with a counselor. They're there for you each and every day, whenever you want, which I think is fabulous. And I think it's a cathartic experience to talk through anything in your life. If you're a person working in the cubicle, how do you handle that? Yeah. How do you handle not interacting with people if you're interacting with a keyboard? Right. And that becomes, your only interaction. I mean, there's byproducts of that have to continue to build over time. Or, prime example for me, I engage people every single day. Mm-hmm. Every day when I walk out of my home, I naturally feel like I have to be on. I have to be on for people. You have to give people your attention and your time because that's my money. Yep. That's my brand. But then how does that affect your homestay? If you're giving everybody else attention, then when you come home, do you shut off? Is that your safe haven? Because that takes away from your marriage. That takes away from your relationship with your child, because you're not allocating time for them. So I think these are all things that are empowering to talk through and to try to understand, because just because you're successful in one aspect of life does not mean you're successful in another.
Right, yeah. And I think personally, that's something I've always struggled with is creating that balance.
And nobody says that stuff anymore, though.
Yeah.
Okay? Like, we live in a world where you're supposed to be, I'm strong all the time. I'm crushing the business game. Look at what my company's doing. Look at what I'm doing. Yeah. And then that question goes to, well, what's next? Right. Like, I heard you up here giving your presentation, like our next investment. Yeah. It never helps you focus on what is or what was, to understand where your company came from to where it is now. Yeah. And I think individually we do the same thing. Right. It's always like, what next project am I working on? Am I gonna, what's going on with Kevin Durant? What are we doing with 35 Ventures? And I'm learning how to try to scale back on that a little bit and appreciate where I am more so than what's always going to be.
Right, and I think what ends up happening is that there are these kind of moments in time where we as kind of society have to kind of stop and pause and reflect. And I think like one of those recently was the whole thing with like the kneeling situation in the NFL. How did the NBA just like that seemed like it didn't kind of cross over?
It did not. They already had it baked into their CBA.
Okay.
So it was baked into their collective bargaining agreement that players could not kneel. Okay. They could protest in different manners. If it was a Trayvon Martin situation, down in Miami, LeBron James, D Wade, Chris Bosh, they all wore hoodies during warm-ups. Right. Multiple years ago to support him. And police brutality, I think the NBA has allowed their players to speak out on issues way more than the NFL has. I mean, also, look, it was the ratings for the NFL finally started to go back up last year and this year. It was a 2-year drought. And I think a lot of it was that. I think a lot of fans, and I'm a fan as well, when I watch sports, I want that to be my outlet. I do not want to think about real world life issues. I want it to be my release. And I think when you start to insert those kind of real world issues into sports, fans do not like that.
Right.
It's something that I deal with every day. I do a morning talk show here in New York called Get Up, and we're with Mike Greenberg and Jalen Rose and all these cast of people, and there are always issues that you have to think about. Okay, do I use my platform to speak about what I really think in this given moment? And for every action, there's a reaction, there are repercussions.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of NFL guys decided to take that stance, i.e. Colin Kaepernick. That has led to a multitude of other things, him not being able to find a position back in the NFL. But he spoke up about something that he believed in. I commend him for that, but there also comes repercussions with that.
Right.
From the business side of Roger Goodell and what he needs to run from a business. I don't agree with everything how they handled it, but at the same time, that's their business, that's how they felt like they needed to handle it.
So was that like the inclusion into the CBA? Was that like a relic from the Mahmoud Abdul Rauf sitting through the national anthem?
Yes.
So that was kind of
That was David Stern a long time ago.
Got it.
And that was also, NFL guys, they talk about that and how they're dealing with their new CBA coming up. For the most violent sport in America, and obviously with all the different reports coming out about CTE, about mental health that they're dealing with, if you've ever been on the field of a football game, I would, if you're lucky enough to do that, you should go see it. I have friends that it is a car accident every Sunday.
Yeah.
To see that your brain can move inside your skull at the rate that these guys hit. I am 6'2", 210 pounds. There are linemen that were faster than me. Yeah. And I'm a point guard. I'm the smallest guy on the NBA court. There are linemen that were faster than me. So to see the kind of collisions that you can have on a day-to-day basis, it's an incredible thing. And the fact that in their CBA, they don't have guaranteed deals. Yep. If you're a player, it's being a modern day gladiator.
Yeah.
Everything's in the favor of the owners or the GMs.
Yeah, so Kelvin Beachum, who's going to come on stage a little bit later today, starting left tackle for the Jets, he mentioned a crazy stat. It's truly depressing, but the average life expectancy for a lineman in the NFL is 51 years old. It's mind-boggling. So
that's the world that they live in. The average career span in the NFL is 4 years.
Yeah.
Average career span in NBA is 3.5, 4 years as well.
Yep.
So, also for these guys, okay, you make a lot of money initially. Well, even prime example, Russell Wilson. Okay, he signed a $65 million signing bonus. That never happens in the NFL. He's the highest paid quarterback of all time in the NFL. He's 5'10", and he's getting that kind of money because he can scat. He drops back in the pocket, he can move, he can run. But you also make yourself more susceptible to getting hit.
Yeah.
So yes, that's one of the rare few occasions that the money is guaranteed, but for a lot of these other players, you're playing on a year-to-year contract.
Yeah, I never understood that because in most aspects of life, there's a balance between risk and reward, and it seems like that kind of has the highest risk of any sport without the reward being guaranteed.
Well, there's no risk for the owners. The reward is only for the owner. So if you're from the owner perspective, that's the best deal of all time.
Yeah, completely. All right, let's lighten this up a little bit.
Okay. Too deep, too quick.
Yeah, it's early. So I think everybody here is familiar with Moneyball, right? And that was about applying data science to the game of baseball. There hasn't been too much talked about with respect to kind of applying a Moneyball approach to basketball. There was obviously I think a great article a couple years ago about the Golden State Warriors and how they optimized towards the number of passes in a game, and they saw, I think since then they've gone on the run that they've gone on.
It does help that they have Stephen Curry.
It definitely helps.
Yes.
And KD.
And KD and Klay Thompson.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But have you seen teams in the NBA start to take a more data-driven approach?
Yes. Bob Myers was one of the head guys over at Golden State that kind of led that charge. Daryl Morey is actually another guy who kind of runs all of Houston Rockets. And if you've seen what Houston's done, they've essentially have mimicked what Golden State Warriors have done. They lead the NBA in three-point attempts. So the game has drastically changed from when we used to be fans of the game, where you throw the ball down low to Hakeem Olajuwon or one of those Patrick Ewing, a great low post player, and you play inside and out. Ray Allen was on Get Up the other day, and he was talking about the fact that if he played a game and he took 6 NBA three-pointers, he was like, man, if I took anything over 6, I feel like I'm forcing it. Right. Well, James Harden the other night was 6 of 20 from the three-point line. He took 20 three-point shots. So when they take 46 three-point shots attempted per game, they're essentially, the data is proving that if we take more threes, we will score more points in a hurry. So think about it, if you're a traditional team, if you're the Denver Nuggets and you play with a guy named Jokic, who is, he's going to be a first-team All-NBA type player, 7 feet tall, extremely great hands, but he's a low post player, plays with his back to the basket to a certain degree. If you're Denver, you're throwing the ball down to him, you have 1 possession, you score. Say you get a stop, you come back down the next possession, you score. 4-0, you're in a 4-0 run. But say you're playing against the Houston Rockets. So, all right, 4-0 run, you score, you're coming down. All of a sudden, James Harden hits a 3, 4-3. All of a sudden, this team can put together, if they make 3 shots in a row, I mean, it's a 9-4 run, like that. So, yes, I think analytics is playing way more of a part in how teams are devising schemes to compete, and the game is getting smaller. So you're seeing more versatile type players. You're seeing players like Giannis. We have a player in college basketball who is very similar. He's going to be the new 4 or the new 5 in the NBA in 5 or 6 years. He's Zion Williamson. He's 6'6", 6'7", 280 pounds. But he's a guy that plays on the perimeter, has the strength to defend the post, but he's going to be optimized more as a perimeter type player. So yes, I think we're seeing that, and we're also seeing that those analytics kind of translate into the new style of players. If I study basketball all the time. 10 years ago, or when I was a kid, I would lower my rim, I would have on my Vince Carter shorts, and I would be outside trying to do like reverse 360 windmills. Sure. Kids don't practice dunks anymore. You see kids on the streets of New York shooting the ball from half court.
Yeah, that's how we did it at the JCC back in the day.
So you guys were way beyond your time. Way beyond your time, exactly.
We had no other choice. We had no other choice.
Always a step ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I love it. So what type of data is being utilized? Like what kind of data collection opportunities are there in the game beyond just passing that's kind of driving this change in the style of play?
I think operation zones, where shots come from, how efficient shots are, pushing the ball. You see Denver doing this a lot more, where they try to get a quick bucket within the first 6 or 7 seconds of the shot clock, because they feel like if they use less time within the shot clock, it makes the game go faster for their pace and their style of play. So I think from a time consumption perspective, that is definitely imperative. Where you're taking those shots from, as far as three-point shot, I think you'll see a lot more three-point shots coming from the top of the key instead of from the wings, because from the wings, the distance is longer. So from the wings, as far as the free throw line extended on the sides right there, those are not the most optimal positions to take three-point shots. If you look at the Houston Rockets, they take a lot more threes from the top of the key three or from the corners. Those are relatively closer to the basket than the wings are. So I think all those are different kind of metrics in which they have, and also on the sides and the weight of players. I think for the style of pace that teams want to play at now, the game is moving exponentially in a faster degree.
Sure.
So you're seeing that prime example, Giannis. Look at what they were able to do with the Milwaukee Bucks. They bring in a guy named Mike Budenholzer, who was the head coach this year. They built a system around Giannis of three-point shooters and players that can space. So now you have a guy like Malcolm Brogdon, who played for Virginia, but now he's a 50-40-90 guy. That means he's shooting 50% from the field, 40% from the three-point line, 90% from the free throw line. So he's a guy that when you play with Giannis, you can't double team Giannis anymore, because he's surrounded with a guy like Malcolm Brogdon or a guy like Brook Lopez, who shoots 43% from the three-point line, who is 6'10", 6'11". Versatile pieces that fit around your star player.
Yeah, you give other teams tough decisions to make. So you mentioned Zion. Mm-hmm. Was the thing that happened with his shoe, is that like the greatest freak thing of all time? Because now it's like, you think about the kind of game theory, like he gets a $100 million+ shoe deal instantly, because if Adidas signs him, they have content for the duration forever, right? So now Nike has to come in way over the top and just make sure that they can't conquest, right?
The day after the whole Zion, they call it Shoegate now.
Okay.
Everything's some kind of gate
Yeah,
going
of course, yeah.
Shoegate, we were on air, and I said, whatever happened to those shoes, if I'm Zion Williamson, I'm holding on to those.
Yeah.
Because I am going into every shoe company meeting, I'm putting them on the table, and I say, tell me why your shoe is going to be Zion proof. And the crazy thing about where the shoe industry is going is that, you know, you obviously have the big time players in the Nikes, the Adidas. You know, you're seeing Puma really trying to come onto the NBA scene.
Yep.
They came out hard last year in the NBA draft with Marvin Bagley, a couple other guys. But you're also seeing you're seeing these Chinese companies that are throwing gazillion dollars at these kids in order for their marketability and their branding. And I think you're going to start seeing a lot more players do the non-traditional route. The NBA game, we had one player in Yao Ming, of course, it was my year, and I saw how the NBA was trying to move over into the CBA, the Chinese Basketball Association, how they're doing more integration. That is an incredible cap space, market space that they're trying to tap into. So I think those shoe companies, obviously being well-funded, recognizing that, you know, I think has Klay Thompson. They paid him an absurd amount of money. Yeah. D Wade is, you know, affiliated with a company over in China. I think athletes now more than ever are recognizing that they are their own business. Yep. And they're looking at that more, even from a content perspective. How can I use an ANTA to subsidize some of the content that I want to push here? How do I do more co-production deals with companies like Players Tribune and companies like ESPN? It's the wild, wild west for content. I think athletes are recognizing that and leveraging the shoe companies to help them build content as well.
Right, and so a lot of that content ends up on social media,
yep.
Naturally. You know, I think on one hand you can have, and I think what you do on social media where the message is positive and you're spreading a good word, but then there's kind of the flip side of it. And I think, like, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, the whole situation with like AB and Juju, like, social media, like, good or bad for professional athletes, and how do you think about the value of it?
It's like life, it's a matter of both. It's really funny though, working on the media side, but also being an ex-athlete, we will always get frustrated when people will give us, you know, diplomatic answers. So if I'm interviewing you after this whole thing, I was like, how do you feel like it went? Like, oh, you know what? We came out, we got all of our new investments in, we felt like we had good interaction, it was great. You're like, oh, okay, next question. So you're not really giving me anything.
I've never been good at that.
You're great at that. What are you talking about? You're doing that the whole time. But I think it can go further than that, because then, you know, I think now we live in an age where I can literally take my phone up and I can just record a message. And I could talk directly to my consumers. And like, brands want us to be more of ourselves, but with that, you get human error. You get emotions. You know, I watch Kevin Durant deal with it all the time, from what's happening right now with Patrick Beverley. You know, how do you handle that through the media lens? Right. We're all competitive, but it can also, you know, go to a fault sometimes when it goes overboard. So I think it's naturally a lot of athletes understanding that they're a brand, and you do have to be as authentic as possible, but you also have to recognize that if you were to say something that people can take out of context. I'll give you one last example. So we had this kid named Grayson Allen that played at Duke a couple of years ago. And Grayson Allen had tripped somebody live during a game. Yep. Live during a game. Literally stuck his foot out and tripped somebody. And I had to make a comment about it at halftime. Now, obviously, I went to school at Duke. I played for Coach K. He's an incredible mentor in my life, almost like a second father to me. Our relationship is like that. That's a kid that he needs to protect. I understand that. By me making comments about that and those carrying waves throughout social media, I then have to deal with my interpersonal relationship with him about how I handled that. Yep. Does that, you know, exclude access from me to the program that obviously we have a ton of attention and time on, to then how do I deal with my fan base that knows me from being a Duke basketball player? Am I alienating myself from my fan base, but I also have to stay true to myself? So it happens the first time, okay. Then it happens the second time. Then it happens a third time. How do I realistically look at myself and say, how do you not call for this kid to be suspended? I love the kid. He's made 3 mistakes. Obviously, there's something more challenging to deal with it from. So I make all these comments. I stand up for the fact that he should be suspended. It blows over. We get to the summer. I'm randomly going to have lunch at a restaurant for a business meeting with my manager, and TMZ is outside. And TMZ says to me, just shows up, camera right in my face, MK, like, oh, Jay, how are you doing? You're like, oh, okay, I'm on camera, all right. And they're like, well, what do you think about the whole Grace Allen thing? Now, I just spoken about this.
Right.
For 6 months. I dealt with conversations with Coach K. Duke fans literally just chopped me off at the knees on social media. Some fans recognizing, other fans loving it, but me just still trying to stay true to myself. And I say, you know what? I'm over this whole Grace Allen thing. I don't want to talk about it anymore. If he wants to trip people, trip people. Like, you know, obviously, and I gave an example of another NBA player that tripped people, like maybe he has to play more of the villain. I'm not condoning it, but I understand sometimes when you're at Duke, you're supposed to be the choir boy. People don't think you have any edge to you. Maybe he tried too hard to have that. I'm over it. Who cares?
Yeah.
So then this year, you know, we're calling an ACC tournament, and there was a kid that plays for Syracuse, and his name was Frank Howard. And Zion Williamson was coming back off a really big injury, and Zion has a dunk, and he's turning around to run down the floor, and Frank Howard sticks out his leg and tries to trip him. And I go on halftime, I said, this is unacceptable. There should be no tripping in college basketball, okay? Or basketball in general, especially for a kid who's gonna make $100 million coming off an injury, playing his first game.
I think they taught you that in preschool.
They do.
Don't trip people.
So this is how it goes. So I say that, a lot of fans, it's on social media, they're agreeing with it, and then out of nowhere, this video comes out from TMZ. Jay Williams condones tripping for Grayson Allen, but doesn't condone it for Zion Williamson, for Frank Howard. And I'm like, oh, okay, so now they cut off a snippet of that video where it's like, I don't care about tripping, trip everybody, who cares? And it makes me seem like I am advocating for Grayson Allen to trip, but that's the age that we live in.
Right.
So then all of a sudden you get with your PR team and now you're on damage control. I'm sure you deal with this all the time. Where it's like, actually we have footage from when I said it was wrong the first, second, and third time, and you feel this need to defend yourself.
Yep.
Do you go over the board with that? When is it too much? How do you delicately balance what is too much, where it looks like you're trying to prove too much that you didn't say that? So I think these are all issues that athletes have to deal with, and now whatever you post on social media, that's your digital footprint.
Yep.
That is your digital resume. Yeah. And for younger players and younger kids, they have to understand that. Sorry for the long-winded.
No, those
it got personal for me, obviously, you guys.
Those are facts. I think we are out of time. Just one last question. Where can everybody see you next, and what are the upcoming projects that you're working on?
I'll be on Get Up a lot during NBA playoffs, which is every morning from 8 until 10 on ESPN. It's really cool. About to announce a partnership with 35 Ventures, which is Kevin Durant's company. They've made multiple investments in Postmates and Uber and other companies such as that sort. We have a show out called The Boardroom. We're about to go into season 2. Co-producing that with them has been incredible. We have had insane conversations on social media with Jack Dorsey, who obviously is the founder of Twitter, Kevin Durant and CJ McCollum. We've done stuff on ownership with Steve Ballmer, who owns the Clippers, and you know what they're getting tax abatement-wise to move all their facilities to Inglewood. What comes along with that? Josh Kroenke, his family owns 5 professional sports franchises. How can players own teams one day? LeBron James. A lot of conversations around branding, ownership, and we're going to be doing a lot more of that and really looking to expand his portfolio. So I'm excited to be a part of that now as well.
Cool. Prediction on NBA Finals?
I'm always wrong on these predictions. If I was right, I would not be working for ESPN. I'd be on my boat in the south of France, home in Vegas. But I would probably have to say Golden State, Milwaukee.
Okay. There you have it.
Golden State winning.
Awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Great stuff.
Thank you.
All right.